Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
This room, the old Senate chamber, is where Daniel Webster spent nearly 2 decades of public service. One of the original artifacts of Daniel Webster, still here at the Capitol, is Webster's old Senate desk. That desk is no longer in this room, but it is still in use today in the current Senate chamber. By agreement, the senior senator from New Hampshire, the state of Daniel Webster's birth, is still allowed to use Daniel Webster's original desk. However, at the time Daniel Webster served in the Senate, his desk was found in this room. Interestingly, in the bottom of his desk, Webster took a penknife and inscribed his name, and those who used his desk after him followed this precedent. Daniel Webster developed his love for penknives at an early age. In fact, Master James Tappan, one of Daniel's first school teachers, told the story of how Daniel received his first penknife.
Daniel was always the brightest boy in the school. He'd learn more in 5 minutes than another boy in 5 hours. One Saturday, I remember, I held up a handsome new jackknife to the scholars, and I said the boy who would commit to memory the greatest number of verses in the Bible by Monday morning should have it. Well, many of the boys did well, but when it came Daniel's turn to recite, I found that he had committed so much to memory that after hearing him repeat some 60 or 70 verses, I was obliged to give up. He telling me still that there were several chapters yet that he had learned. And Daniel got that jackknife.
Daniel Webster learned early to love the Bible, and his love for that book never waned. In fact, on the 4th of July, 1851, the year before his death, he stood here, outside the Capitol, and delivered a speech on the occasion of the laying of the cornerstone for the Capitol for the additions that have now become the House and the Senate chambers.
Man is not only an intellectual, but he's also a religious being, and his religious feelings and habits require cultivation. Let the religious element in man's nature be neglected, let him be influenced by no higher motives than low self-interest, and subjected to no stronger restraint than the limits of civil authority, and he becomes the creature of selfish passion or blind fanaticism. The spectacle of a nation, France, powerful and enlightened, but without Christian faith, has been presented as a warning beacon for the nations. On the other hand, the cultivation of the religious sentiment represses licentiousness, incites to general benevolence, and the practical acknowledgement of the brotherhood of man, inspires respect for law and order, and gives strength to the whole social fabric.
Daniel Webster did not believe that the public good would ever be served apart from Christianity. As he reminded one gathering,
"Whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens."
Daniel Webster, one of the great leaders here in the Capitol, was outspoken about Christianity both in private and in public.
The first Catholic that preached at the Capitol was Bishop John England. As a matter of fact, this is the sermon that he preached at the U.S. Capitol. It's delivered in the hall of the House of Representatives by the Honorable Reverend John England. So this is the first Catholic. Now,
what year was that?
This is in 1826. The president that year was John Quincy Adams. And John Quincy Adams enters public service when he's 11 years old.
Wow.
At the age of 11, John Quincy Adams received a congressional diplomatic appointment overseas to Europe at the age of 11. So he enters into public service at 11, and for the next 68 years he's in public service. He's an ambassador to 5 different nations. He's a Secretary of State. He was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court and confirmed, but declined the appointment. He is a U.S. President. He's a U.S. Senator. He spent 17 years in the House of Representatives, and the man kept a diary. And he kept an incredible diary. He started when he was 11 years old. He kept it for the next 68 years. And so despite all these activities, on his diary entry, he doesn't say, well, I woke up this morning at 7:30 and went to bed at 8:30. He'll have 8 to 10 to 12 pages a day in his diary of what went on. And when it comes to Sundays, he records in his diary who preached, the verses they used, what he thought of the sermon, what he thought they should have used as verses in the sermon. He spoke 7 languages. He read the Bible in 7 different languages. And if you want to be embarrassed, you read in the diary John Quincy Adams, and he'll be reading, you'll be reading on Sunday, and he'll say, well, as I was looking today at Romans 8, it appears to me that the Russians did a much better translation out of the Greek than the French did. Although its German translation is not bad, he's going through all these editions looking back at the Greek to see who. So here's the President of the United States. Well, he records about having met Bishop John England and the sermon he preached that day and how good it was and how powerful it was. And he records about the various times that he heard various people speak. Gallaudet, the guy who founded the School for the Deaf, was one of the folks who preached at the U.S. Capitol. And so over these 68 years of records of John Quincy Adams, you get a steady diet of who is preaching. Chaplains preached. Matter of fact, here was one of the sermons preached by the chaplain, Chaplain Stockton, who was chaplain twice, actually. He served 2 different times in Congress as chaplain. It's called The Imperishable and Saving Works of Christ, delivered in the hall of the House of Representatives. Gives this verse. And I mean, these are very evangelical sermons, very pointed sermons, and this is what we did in U.S. Congress for a century.
The National Statuary Hall contains other statues commemorating the lives and accomplishments of many famous Christians, such as this one of Junipero Serra, the missionary with cross held high, and Marcus Whitman, preacher and frontier trailblazer, with Bible held under his arm, and there are many others. On this side of Statuary Hall, we have a statue of Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster was part of the second generation of American statesmen. He was a young man during the American Revolution, and he grew up listening to the speeches of Presidents George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. Following his own entry into politics, Daniel Webster became a leading national figure. He served almost a decade in the U.S. House, nearly 2 decades in the U.S. Senate, and he was the Secretary of State for 3 different presidents. Daniel Webster gained a reputation as an exceptional orator. His powers of argumentation were persuasive, whether arguing a case in the Supreme Court or debating a bill in Congress. In fact, so great were his skills that it is reported that attorneys, when learning they'd be opposing Daniel Webster, would sometimes withdraw from a case rather than face Webster's genius. Daniel Webster's strong commitment to the principles of law and the Constitution earned him the title, the Defender of the Constitution. As a famous orator, Daniel Webster expressed the belief that no one could become a great orator without studying the Word of God. In fact, Webster regularly practiced his own oratory by reading the Bible aloud. There are wonderful anecdotal accounts of visitors and Capitol staff gathering just to listen to Daniel Webster read the Bible. Webster's voice would thunder and boom, and it seemed as if the doors would rattle off their hinges as he recited the words spoken by the Almighty. Charles Landman, Webster's personal Senate secretary, recalled,
We well remember his quotation of some of the verses in the 38th chapter of Job. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. And so forth. Mr. Webster was a fine reader, and his recitation of particular passages which he admired was never surpassed, and was capable of giving the most exquisite delight to those who could appreciate them.